Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at Turkish music theory.
Okay.
And specifically the work of a guy named Rauf Yekta.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
Funny name.
he's considered like a really foundational figure,
Yeah.
but he also sparks a lot of debate.
Sure.
And our sources for this are 3 lectures by Professor Ozan Yarman.
Okay.
And he offers a really pointed critique of Rauf Yekta.
Uh-huh.
What's interesting is that these lectures are from a symposium that was actually celebrating Rauf Yekta.
Oh, wow.
So it's not every day that you get, such a direct pushback at an event that's supposed to be celebrating this guy.
Yeah, that's what makes these lectures so valuable.
Right.
It's not a perspective you would typically encounter at a, kind of tribute or celebration like this.
Yeah.
So it forces us to grapple with Yekta's legacy,
Right.
with a bit more of a critical eye.
So for those of us who aren't Turkish music scholars, who is Rauf Yekta?
So Rauf Yekta was really like a major force in Turkish music in the early 20th century.
Yep.
He was a talented multi-instrumentalist. He was a prolific music theorist and even a sharp music critic.
Wow.
But his work is really complex and full of contradictions.
That's what I found so interesting about these lectures.
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, he's this champion for Anatolian folk music.
Right.
He sees it as, this pure expression of Turkish identity.
Yeah.
But then he shifts his focus to Ottoman classical music.
Okay.
And wants to make it, quote unquote, modern.
Right.
And on par with Western music.
Yeah, I think that shift is really telling.
Yeah.
It reflects the turbulent times that Yekta lived in, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the rise of Turkish nationalism.
Right.
All of these forces really shaped his thinking.
Okay.
And, this desire for a pure Turkish music, I think really led him down some interesting paths.
Okay.
He embraced Byzantine music, but at the same time, he dismissed Arab music as primitive, almost as if he were trying to create a specific narrative of, what Turkish music should be, which aligned with a certain political agenda.
And he wasn't shy about these opinions.
No, not at all.
It makes you think about how much, external factors like politics and social trends actually influence something as seemingly, abstract as music theory.
Absolutely.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty of his actual theories.
Sure.
He's known for the system of 24 unequal tones.
Right.
In Turkish, it's called the Gayri Musavi 24 Perdeli Taksimat.
Right.
What is that all about?
So it's based on the Pythagorean system.
Okay.
The ancient Greek mathematical ratios for musical intervals.
Yeah.
But Yekta kind of takes it a step further.
Yeah.
And claims that this 24-tone system was present in ancient Turkish and Iranian music.
Okay.
And he believes that it actually predates the Greeks.
That's a pretty big claim.
It is.
It seems like he was really trying to, rewrite or reshape the narrative of musical history, putting Turkish music at the forefront and minimizing Arab influence.
I think so.
Yeah.
And, this was also tied to the whole Turkish history thesis that was really popular at the time.
Yes.
This idea of, this ancient and superior Turkish culture.
And so this is all feeding into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Professor Yarman, points out that this thesis led to some really shaky historical claims. Yekta even goes so far as to say that Pythagoras got his musical ideas from the ancient Turks.
Wow. Talk about revisionist history.
Right.
But what are the practical implications of his 24-tone system?
Yeah.
How does it actually sound?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Professor Yarman argues that while it's mathematically elegant, this system doesn't accurately reflect the microtonal complexities of Turkish makam music. So he analyzes specific makamans like Isfahan or Rast.
Okay.
And he shows how their intervals don't really fit neatly into Yekta's 24-tone framework.
So it's a theory that looks good on paper, right, but doesn't actually match the reality of musical practice.
Exactly. It's a real oversimplification of a very nuanced and complex musical tradition.
Yeah.
It's like trying to squeeze a vast flowing river into a narrow, rigid canal.
I like that analogy.
You might get some of the water through, but you lose the natural beauty and dynamism of the original.
And to add to that, Professor Yarman also points out that Ottoman-era instruments like the timbre often had extra frets that go beyond those 24 tones.
Exactly. It's like finding extra puzzle pieces that don't fit the picture you thought you were building.
Right.
And this suggests that Turkish music historically was even more complex than Yekta's system allows for.
So where does Professor Yarman go from there? He's not just, critiquing, he's actually proposing his own alternative, right?
Yeah, he doesn't just, tear down.
Right.
He offers something in its place.
And it's called the Yarmanian fretting.
Yes, the Yarmanian fretting.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So this is a fascinating theory. Okay.
And it's based on a 17-tone system that he derives from an old Oud drawing.
Okay.
And it's still Pythagorean in its foundation, but it allows for a much more accurate representation of the intervals that are actually heard in Turkish Meka music.
Okay.
And he's not just theorizing here.
Yeah.
He actually demonstrates this practically by mapping various historical Mekam scales onto a 79-tone Quanon tuning that he developed.
Wow. So it's like he's saying, let's look at the actual musical practice, the historical instruments, and then create a theory that reflects that reality.
Exactly.
Instead of imposing this rigid system from the top down.
Exactly.
Now, his 17-tone system also has another interesting aspect to it.
Yes.
It reconciles some contradictions that are found in the writings of Safi al-Din Ormawi, who was this 13th century theorist.
Yeah, a major figure that Yekta himself drew heavily upon.
Now, that's what I call digging deep.
Yeah.
But before we get totally lost in the theoretical weeds here.
Let's zoom back out to the bigger picture.
Okay.
Yekta wasn't just about, scales and intervals.
Right.
He also had really strong opinions about how Turkish music should evolve, how it should be modernized.
Right.
And that's where we see another layer of complexity.
Yes.
So initially, he supported using Western harmony to create this new national music based on Turkish folk melodies.
Okay.
But later, he actually becomes quite critical of this approach.
Yeah, he really changes his tune on that one.
Wait, so he flip-flops on that too?
He does.
What happened?
Well, it seems that as his own ideas evolved and as Turkish nationalism gained momentum, he became more and more insistent on a pure Turkish music.
Okay.
Untainted by what he perceived as Western corruption.
Oh, so he's afraid that by embracing these Western elements, it's going to dilute the essence of Turkish musical identity.
Exactly. He's trying to construct these boundaries, these walls around, what is authentically Turkish.
But isn't that a bit restrictive?
It's a great question.
Doesn't it limit the potential for creativity and evolution?
That's something that Professor Yarman really grapples with in these lectures.
Okay.
He argues that Yekta, in his quest for purity, this kind of historical justification, ends up imposing these limitations on Turkish music.
Okay.
It's like he's saying Turkish music can be modern, but only on my terms.
Right.
Only within the confines of my theories.
But and ironically, while he's criticizing Western harmonization as shallow, he himself champions the idea of a Turkish opera.
Oh, yeah. The contradictions are fascinating.
Right.
Reveals this kind of selective embrace of Western forms.
Yeah.
He's okay with opera.
Right.
This grand, ambitious format.
Yeah.
But not with something as seemingly basic as harmonizing folk melodies.
Talk about having your baklava and eating it, too.
Right.
It makes you wonder if he truly believed it was possible to create a genuinely Turkish opera.
Right.
That was free from Western influence.
Yeah, or was it more about, claiming ownership of this prestigious Western form, adapting it?
To bolster national pride.
Exactly.
It's a puzzle.
It is.
And this puzzle goes beyond just opera.
Right.
I think it speaks to this wider phenomenon that we see throughout history of, cultures grappling with how to modernize, how to engage with these global trends without losing their own unique identity.
It's like walking a tightrope between preservation and evolution.
And speaking of history, we can't ignore this whole Turkish history thesis that looms so large in Yekta's work.
Absolutely.
Professor Yarman spends quite a bit of time unpacking that.
He does.
And he argues that, this thesis, this nationalist push to emphasize the ancient origins and superiority of Turkish culture really led Yekta down some problematic paths.
Yeah, he makes some pretty bold claims.
Yeah.
this insistence that the 24-tone system predates the Greeks.
Right.
That even Pythagoras drew inspiration from Turkish sources.
Yeah.
But, as Professor Yarman shows, it's not really supported by the historical evidence.
So this desire for a grand Turkish narrative, this need to prove the supremacy of Turkish music, ends up distorting the historical record?
I think so.
And it's not just about historical accuracy.
Right.
Professor Yarman points out that this focus on a singular, pure Turkish musical lineage comes at the expense of acknowledging the rich diversity and cross-cultural influences that have always been a part of Turkish music.
Exactly.
He's basically saying that by trying to create these rigid boundaries, Yekta, ironically, ends up presenting a less complete and less nuanced picture of Turkish music.
I think that's a really good point.
And this brings us to one of the most important points that Professor Yarman makes, which is the impact of Yekta's theories on the actual teaching and practice of Turkish music.
Right, because we've talked a lot about the theory.
Yeah.
But how did it translate into real-world music making?
Right. Does it help musicians?
Yeah.
Did it hinder them?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Professor Yarman is quite critical of how Yekta's 24-tone system has become entrenched in Turkish music education. He argues that it's led to this really rigid, dogmatic approach that prioritizes theory over practice. And that it stifles the very creativity that it was meant to foster.
So instead of opening doors for young musicians, the system has almost become a barrier.
I think so.
Limiting their exploration and expression.
Yeah, he sees it as this disconnect between theory and practice. Where the theory becomes an end in itself rather than a tool for understanding and creating music.
And this actually connects to another critique that Yarman makes, which is this whole division between classical and folk music theory in Turkey. And he sees that as a direct consequence of Yekta's later views.
Absolutely.
So remember how Yekta initially championed Anatolian folk music, but then shifted his focus to Ottoman classical music?
Yeah, and even dismissing folk music as primitive in his later years.
It's like you're splitting the roots of a tree in two. And expecting it to thrive. You're severing the very source of its interconnectedness.
And Yarman seems to be proposing a way to bridge that gap. To create this more unified understanding of Turkish music.
Okay, so what is he suggesting?
He believes that his Yarmanian fretting system, with its greater flexibility and sensitivity to microtones, can accommodate both the intricacies of classical makeup and the nuances of folk melodies.
So he's recognizing the shared foundation, the common ground, but allowing for variations and these regional differences.
Exactly.
This sounds like a pretty ambitious undertaking.
It is.
Is he suggesting like a complete overhaul of Turkish music theory?
Not necessarily a complete overhaul, but a real shift in perspective, a reevaluation of some deeply ingrained assumptions. He's not advocating for just throwing out Yekta's work entirely, but rather for a more critical and nuanced engagement with it. Recognize the valuable contributions, but also acknowledge the limitations and the biases.
Separate the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly.
Take what's useful and leave behind what's no longer serving the music or the musicians.
Exactly. And it's not just about theory for theory's sake. Professor Yarman seems to be genuinely concerned about the impact that these theoretical frameworks have on the way music is taught, learned, and performed. He's advocating for a more holistic, inclusive approach. That honors both the tradition and the potential for innovation within that tradition.
So it makes you think about the responsibility of scholars and theorists, not just to, analyze and dissect, but to consider the real-world consequences of their ideas, how they might shape the future of the music that they love.
And that brings us back to a question that we posed earlier. What would a truly Turkish opera sound like? Could Yarman's system, with its greater flexibility and emphasis on the microtonal nuances of Turkish music. Could that provide a new path for composers? Could it help to create a form of opera that is both authentically Turkish and innovative.
Yeah.
Pushing the boundaries of the genre.
Those are questions we can't answer definitively.
Right.
But it's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It is.
It's a reminder that music theory isn't just this academic exercise. It's a living, breathing thing that has a direct impact on the music being created and experienced in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it takes a dissenting voice.
Yeah.
A challenge to the status quo to spark those new possibilities.
And Rauf Yekta, despite his contradictions and his sometimes rigid views, was a pioneer who helped to shape Turkish music in the 20th century.
Yeah.
But Professor Yarman reminds us that no one has a monopoly on the truth.
That's right.
That even the most revered figures should be subject to scrutiny and reevaluation.
It's an ongoing process.
It's a reminder that knowledge is an ongoing process, a conversation, a debate.
Right.
And sometimes the most fruitful conversations are the ones that challenge our assumptions and make us rethink what we thought we knew.
What makes exploring these ideas so rewarding?
Yeah.
You know, it's not about arriving at these definitive answers,
but
about opening up these new avenues of inquiry, new ways of listening, new ways of appreciating the richness and complexity of Turkish music.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to continue this exploration on your own.
Yeah.
Listen to the music, delve into the theory, and let your own ears be the judge.
Absolutely.
What resonates with you? What challenges your assumptions?
What possibilities do you hear for the future of Turkish music?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time. Welcome back. We're picking up our deep dive into Rauf Yekta and Turkish music theory.
Right.
And when we left off, we were talking about his really, complex views on how Turkish music should kind of navigate the modern world.
Right.
Seems caught between wanting to elevate it to a global stage, but also pushing back against Western influence.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head.
Right.
Yekta's wrestling with this tension between tradition and innovation. And, to understand his perspective, I think we have to remember the historical context.
Okay.
Remember, he's writing during this time of immense upheaval.
Right.
The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the birth of the Turkish Republic.
Yes.
This surge of nationalistic fervor.
It's like the whole identity of the nation is being renegotiated.
Absolutely.
And music gets caught up in that.
Right.
So what did he actually find so objectionable about Western-influenced Turkish music?
Well, he criticizes composers like Kemal Rishere.
Okay.
Who was, popular for harmonizing Turkish folk songs in a Western style. He basically says that they're forcing these Turkish folk melodies into Western harmonic structures.
Okay.
And that they lack an understanding of true Turkish make-em principles.
So he sees it as almost like a betrayal.
Yeah. He calls their music childish.
Wow.
He says it's a superficial imitation, a cheapening of the tradition.
But it's interesting, though, because wasn't Yekta himself initially in favor of incorporating Western harmony?
He was.
Into Turkish music? So what changed?
Well, it seems that as his own ideas evolved and as Turkish nationalism kind of gained momentum, he became more and more insistent on a pure Turkish music.
Okay.
Untainted by what he perceived as Western corruption.
So he's afraid that embracing these Western elements are going to essentially dilute the essence of Turkish musical identity.
Right. He's trying to construct these boundaries, these walls around what's authentically Turkish.
But doesn't that feel a bit restrictive?
It's a good question.
Like, doesn't it limit the potential for creativity and evolution?
And that's a question that Professor Yarman really grapples with in these lectures.
Okay.
He argues that, Yekta, in his quest for this purity and, this historical justification ends up imposing limitations on Turkish music.
Okay.
It's like he's saying Turkish music can be modern, but only on my terms.
Right.
Only within the confines of my theories.
But and it's ironic, too, because while he's criticizing Western harmonization as shallow, he's championing the idea of a Turkish opera.
I know. Talk about contradictions, right?
Right.
It's fascinating.
This genre is so deeply rooted in Western tradition.
It reveals this kind of selective embrace of Western forms.
Right.
He's okay with opera,
Yeah.
this grand, ambitious format, but not with something as seemingly basic as harmonizing folk melodies.
It makes you wonder if he really believed that it was even possible.
Yeah. To create a genuinely Turkish opera, free from Western influence.
Right. Or was it more about, claiming ownership of this prestigious Western form, adapting it to bolster Turkish national pride?
It's a puzzle.
It really is.
And, I think this puzzle goes beyond just opera.
Right.
It speaks to this wider phenomenon of, cultures throughout history grappling with how to modernize.
Yeah, how to engage with global trends without losing their own unique identity.
Right. It's this balancing act.
It is. It's like walking a tightrope.
Right.
Between preservation and evolution.
And speaking of history, we can't ignore this whole Turkish history thesis.
Of course.
That looms so large in Yekta's work.
It's a big part of his thinking.
Professor Yarman spends quite a bit of time unpacking that as well.
He does.
And he argues that this thesis, this nationalist push to emphasize the ancient origins and superiority of Turkey to culture, led Yekta down some problematic paths. Yeah, he makes some pretty bold claims. This insistence that the 24-tone system predates the Greeks, that even Pythagoras drew inspiration from Turkish sources.
Like he's rewriting history.
He is, and as Professor Yarman points out, it's not really supported by the evidence.
So in a sense, this desire for this grand Turkish narrative, this need to prove the supremacy of Turkish music, ends up distorting the historical record.
I think so, and it's not just about historical accuracy.
Okay.
Professor Yarman points out that this focus on the singular, pure Turkish musical lineage comes at the expense of acknowledging the rich diversity and cross-cultural influences that have always been a part of Turkish music.
He's basically saying that by trying to create these rigid boundaries, Yekta, ironically, ends up presenting a less complete, less nuanced picture.
A more simplified version.
Yeah, of Turkish music.
Yeah.
And this brings us to one of the most important points that Professor Yarman makes, which is the impact of Yekta's theories on the actual teaching and practice of Turkish music.
Right, because we've talked a lot about theory, but how did this translate into real-world music making?
Right. Did it help musicians?
Yeah.
Did it hinder them?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Professor Yarman is quite critical of how Yekta's 24-tone system has become so entrenched in Turkish music education.
Okay.
He argues that it's led to this rigid, almost dogmatic approach to teaching, that it prioritizes theory over practice, and that it stifles the very creativity that it was meant to foster.
So instead of, opening doors for young musicians, it's almost like the system has become a barrier.
I think so, yeah.
Limiting their exploration and expression.
He sees this disconnect between theory and practice, where the theory becomes an end in itself rather than a tool for understanding and creating music.
Right, and this connects back to another critique that Yarman makes.
Yeah.
This whole division between classical and folk music theory in Turkey.
Right.
And he sees that as a direct consequence of Yekta's later views.
Absolutely. Remember how he initially championed Anatolian folk music?
Yes.
But then shifted his focus to Ottoman classical music.
And even dismissing folk music as primitive.
Yeah, in his later years.
So it's like he's creating this separation between these two really intertwined branches of Turkish music. Right. So Yarman seems to be proposing a way to bridge that gap.
That's right.
To create this more unified understanding of Turkish music.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is he actually suggesting?
So he believes that his Yarmanian fretting system, with its greater flexibility and sensitivity to microtones, can accommodate both the intricacies of classical makeup and the nuances of folk melodies.
So he's recognizing that shared foundation, that common ground, but allowing for variations, regional differences. Yeah. This sounds like a pretty ambitious undertaking.
It is.
Is he suggesting a complete overhaul of Turkish music theory?
Not necessarily complete overhaul, but a real shift in perspective, a reevaluation of some of these really deeply ingrained assumptions.
Okay.
He's not saying that, we need to just throw out Yekta's work entirely, but rather, engage with it in a more critical and nuanced way.
Okay.
Recognize the valuable contributions, but also acknowledge the limitations and the biases.
Separate the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly.
Take what's useful. Leave behind what's no longer serving the music or the musicians.
And, it's not just about theory for theory's sake. Professor Yarman seems to be genuinely concerned about the impact that these theoretical frameworks have on the way that music is taught, learned, and performed. He's advocating for a more holistic, inclusive approach.
Okay.
That honors both the tradition and the potential for innovation within that tradition.
Makes you think about the responsibility of scholars and theorists.
Yeah.
Not just to analyze and dissect,
but to consider the real-world consequences
of their idea,
how they might shape the future of the music they love.
And it brings us back to that question that we posed earlier.
Yeah.
What would a truly Turkish opera sound like?
Right. Could Yarman's system, with its greater flexibility and emphasis on these microtonal nuances,
could it provide a new path for composers?
Yeah.
Could it help to create a form of opera that is both authentically Turkish and innovative, pushing the boundaries of the genre?
Those are questions that we can't answer definitively.
Right.
But it's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It is.
It's a reminder that, music theory isn't just this academic exercise.
It's a living, breathing thing
that
has a direct impact on the music being created and experienced in the world.
And sometimes it takes a dissenting voice, a challenge to the status quo, to spark those new possibilities.
And, Rauf Yekta, despite his contradictions and, his sometimes rigid views, was a pioneer. He was.
Who helped to shape Turkish music in the 20th century.
Right.
But Professor Yarman reminds us that no one has a monopoly on truth.
Right.
That even the most revered figures should be subject to scrutiny and reevaluation.
It's an ongoing conversation.
It is.
It's a debate.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most fruitful conversations are the ones that challenge our assumptions.
Yes, Louis.
And make us rethink what we thought we knew.
And that's what makes exploring these ideas so rewarding.
Yeah.
It's not about arriving at these definitive answers.
Right.
But about opening up these new avenues of inquiry, new ways of listening.
Yeah.
New ways of appreciating the richness and complexity of Turkish music.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to continue this exploration on your own.
Absolutely.
Listen to the music.
Yeah.
Delve into the theory and let your own ears be the judge.
Exactly.
What resonates with you?
What challenges your assumptions?
What possibilities do you hear for the future of Turkish music?
Rauf Yekta, A Critique of the Symposium. This YouTube transcript critiques the International Rauf Yekta Symposium held in January 2023, questioning its objectivity. The speaker, Ozan Yarman, examines Rauf Yekta's contributions to Turkish music while also exploring controversies and criticisms surrounding his work. The critique discusses Yekta's ethnocentrism, views on Western music, and relationship to both Ottoman and Kemalist ideologies. It analyzes his theoretical propositions, engagement with historical context, and influence on Turkish musicology. The transcript highlights discussions around Yekta's complex legacy and conflicting interpretations of his significance. Ultimately, Yarman presents a nuanced and critical perspective on Rauf Yekta and his impact on Turkish musical culture. 4 sources. The provided transcripts are from YouTube videos analyzing Turkish music theory and history. A central figure is Rauf Yekta Bey, a musicologist whose work is critically examined, with the videos scrutinizing his theories, inconsistencies, and influences. The analysis looks at Yekta's views on Turkish music in relation to Western music, his perspective on folk versus classical forms, and his place within Turkey's broader cultural and political landscape. The speaker challenges prevailing glorifications of Yekta, revealing potential biases, contradictions, and the impact of his ideas on contemporary Turkish musical thought. Alternative theories, such as those of Safiyeddin Ermoui, are explored for context. In a broader sense, the relationship with Turkish music is being analyzed as it relates to non-Turkish or Western forms. Rauf Yekta, Symposium's Critique, Part 1. This source presents a critical analysis of the Rauf Yekta Symposium, an event dedicated to exploring the life and work of Rauf Yekta Bey, a prominent figure in Turkish music history. The speaker, Professor Ozan Yarman, dissects the symposium's presentations, pointing out what he sees as ethnocentric biases and a tendency to idealize Yekta while denigrating other influential musicians like Arel and Ezgi. Yarman delves into Yekta's complex relationship with Western music, his views on Turkish folk music, and his controversial stance on quarter tones, revealing contradictions and potential political motivations behind Yekta's seemingly nationalistic perspectives. The critique also touches upon Yekta's relationships with minority communities, his involvement with political movements, and the handling of his personal archives, ultimately questioning whether the symposium presented a balanced and objective portrayal of this multifaceted historical figure, and exploring how Turkish identity was being defined in relation to the Kemalist government and Western culture. Rauf Yekta, Symposium's Critique, Part 2. This source is a transcript of a video criticizing the Rauf Yekta Symposium, dissecting the life, work, and legacy of Rauf Yekta Bey, an influential figure in Turkish musicology. The speaker critiques Yekta's theories, particularly his unequal 24-tone division and his complex relationship with both Western and Turkish musical traditions. It questions his nationalism, Orientalism, and scientific rigor, suggesting inconsistencies and biases in his work, while other perspectives are explored, like his place in Turkish modernism, contrasting opinions about his work and historical perspective. The discussion further investigates Yekta's role in shaping Turkish music history, highlighting the potential pitfalls of uncritically embracing his theories, and how it plays into larger cultural forces.
What were the primary goals and motivations behind the Rauf Yekta Symposium event?
The primary goals and motivations behind the Rauf Yekta Symposium event appear to be multifaceted and complex, as suggested by the critical analysis provided in the YouTube transcript. Here's a breakdown. Paying homage to Rauf Yekta Bey, the event aimed to honor Rauf Yekta for his contributions to Turkish music history, theory, performance, and preservation, recognizing him as a musiki hero who dedicated his life to Turkish music. 1, 2. The symposium served as a debt of gratitude on the 88th anniversary of his death. 1. Rehabilitating Rauf Yekta's image. The symposium seemingly sought to promote Rauf Yekta as an unparalleled figure, potentially to counter what some perceive as a decline in the appreciation of traditional Turkish music. 1. Some critics suggest the event aimed to groom Rauf Yekta as an alternative to established views, potentially exalting his ethnocentric perspectives. 1. Re-evaluating Turkish music history. The event provided a platform to re-examine Turkish music history through the lens of Rauf Yekta's work, potentially challenging existing narratives and promoting a specific understanding of Turkish musical identity. 1, 2. It aimed to rescue the civilization's flag and ensure that Turkish music is updated and embraced by new generations by embracing the ideas of musicians such as Rauf Yekta. 3. Promoting ethnocentric views. Some critics argue that the symposium inadvertently promoted ethnocentric views by downplaying the contributions of other cultures to Turkish music and exaggerating the uniqueness and superiority of Turkish musical traditions. 1. This was done by conveying messages that glorified ethnocentrism and praised Rauf Yekta uncritically, creating a cult of personality. 1. Challenging Kemalist perspectives. The symposium indirectly challenged the Kemalist regime's approach to Turkish music, which favored Western techniques and folk music. 2. By celebrating Rauf Yekta, who opposed this approach and championed Ottoman classical music, the event questioned the official narrative of Turkish music history. 2. Elevating Turkish music above others. Rauf Yekta sought to equate Turkish classical music with Western music, disparaging European musical works while asserting that both musical traditions originate from the same theoretical roots. 4. Addressing perceived deficiencies. Some viewed the symposium as an admission of deficiency, implying that previous approaches to Turkish music history and education have been inadequate. 2. The event sought to rectify these perceived shortcomings by highlighting Rauf Yekta's contributions and promoting his ideas. 2. Disregarding flaws. The seminar was also criticized for being overly flattering and ignoring flaws. 5. Correcting alleged historical wrongs. By implication, the event sought to correct what some perceive as historical injustices against Turkish music and culture, potentially caused by Western influence or misguided policies. 3. It aimed to rescue Turkish music from ill-treatment and ensure its survival and development. 3. A political agenda. Some viewed the event as an effort to push Rauf Yekta's theories into mainstream musicology. 6. In summary, the Rauf Yekta Symposium appears to have been driven by a desire to honor a significant figure in Turkish music history, re-evaluate Turkish musical identity, challenge existing narratives, and promote specific perspectives on Turkish music and culture. 1-3. However, the event has also faced criticism for its potential ethnocentrism, uncritical praise of Rauf Yekta, and perceived political agenda. 1-5.
How do you evaluate the fact that Yarman's vociferation, since to decades, of many of the critical points here had gone unheeded in Turkish musicology? Is there a scientific basis for such a resistance against his foundational objections? Or do you think Turkish musicology is ideologically motivated even today?
Based on the provided YouTube transcript, it's difficult to definitively evaluate why Ozan Yarman's criticisms have gone unheeded in Turkish musicology for 2 decades. However, the sources offer some potential explanations for this resistance and suggest the possibility of ideological motivations within the field. Potential reasons for the resistance against Yarman's criticisms: entrenched narratives and established authorities. The transcript suggests that Turkish musicology may be clinging to established narratives and figures like Erel, Ezgi, and Uzi Dilek. 1-2. Challenging these authorities, as Yarman does, can be met with resistance from those who have built their careers and reputations on these established frameworks. Ideological underpinnings. The transcript implies that Turkish musicology may be influenced by ideological considerations, such as Turkish nationalism or Kemalist perspectives. 1-49. Yarman's criticisms, which challenge these perspectives and expose inconsistencies in the historical narrative, may be unwelcome in a field that is deeply intertwined with national identity and cultural politics. Defense of Turkish music. Some in Turkish musicology may see Yarman's critique of Rauf Yekta's ethnocentrism as harmful to the defense and promotion of Turkish music. 3. Lack of scientific basis. The transcript implies that some of Yarman's objections are foundational and challenge the very basis of certain accepted theories and methodologies in Turkish musicology. 5-23. However, without a deeper analysis of the specific objections and the responses to them, it is difficult to assess whether there is a scientific basis for the resistance. It is possible that some of Yarman's claims lack sufficient evidence or are based on flawed interpretations of historical sources. The appeal to Turkish exceptionalism. Yarman suggests that Turkish musicology's ready acceptance of Rauf Yekta's more questionable theories is the product of Turkish society's obsession with Turkish exceptionalism. Evidence for potential ideological motivations. The Kemalist regime's influence. The transcript mentions the Kemalist regime's preference for Western techniques and folk music, and its suppression of Ottoman classical music. 4, 16, 19, 21. This historical context suggests that Turkish musicology may have been shaped by political agendas, which could explain the resistance to Yarman's criticisms of Rauf Yekta, who championed Ottoman classical music. The portrayal of Rauf Yekta as a nationalist hero. The symposium's attempt to rehabilitate Rauf Yekta's image and present him as a defender of Turkish music suggests a nationalistic agenda. 1-49. This could explain the resistance to criticisms that challenge this heroic narrative. The focus on Turkish identity. The transcript highlights the symposium's focus on Turkish musical identity and its attempt to define what constitutes true Turkish music. 16-21. This emphasis on national identity suggests that ideological considerations may be at play in shaping the field. In conclusion, while it is difficult to definitively determine the reasons for the resistance against Yarman's criticisms, the sources suggest that a combination of entrenched narratives, ideological underpinnings, and a lack of scientific rigor may be contributing factors. It is possible that Turkish musicology is still influenced by ideological motivations, which could explain the resistance to criticisms that challenge established perspectives and narratives.
I uploaded a new video source, where I presented the ideological background in the formation of the ill-suited current Turkish music theory. Can you re-evaluate my previous question in this context?
Theoretical Crisis and a Way Out, Presentation to ITR High School. This transcript captures a presentation and discussion on the crisis of music theory in Turkish music, specifically addressing challenges in Nazariyat, music theory. The speaker argues that the current Nazariyat, primarily the Arelezge Ezdelek system, is ill-suited for accurately representing Turkish makam music. This system, based on a 24-tone unequal division of the octave, doesn't fully account for microtonal nuances, and stems from ideological biases embedded in early Republic-era efforts to modernize Turkish music by rejecting perceived Arab and Byzantine influences. The speaker proposes an alternative 79-tone system designed to bridge the gap between theory and practice by better representing intonation in makam music and facilitating both traditional performance and microtonal composition. Given the additional context from the new YouTube source, which focuses on the ideological background in the formation of the current, ill-suited Turkish music theory, a re-evaluation of the previous question regarding Professor Dr. Ozan Yarman's criticisms is possible. The new source provides a deeper understanding of the historical and ideological forces that shaped Turkish music theory, potentially explaining why Yarman's criticisms have been resisted. It suggests that the current state of Turkish music theory is not simply the result of scientific or academic discourse, but is also deeply intertwined with nation-building, cultural identity, and political agendas. Here's a re-evaluation of the previous question in this context. Justification of Yarman's criticisms and content. Critique of Ziya Gökalp's influence. According to Yarman, Ziya Gökalp, a prominent figure in the early Turkish Republic, advocated for a musiki İnkılabı, musical revolution, that aimed to replace Ottoman-era music with a new, Western-influenced Turkish music. This revolution involved closing the Turkish music department at the Istanbul Conservatory in 1926. 1. Gökalp's ideas, rooted in Turkish nationalism, dismissed Ottoman music as synthetic and influenced by Byzantine and Arabic traditions. 1. This ideological stance led to a rejection of quarter tones and a preference for pentatonic scales, which were seen as more authentically Turkish. 1. 2. Rejection of quarter tones. The source emphasizes that the rejection of quarter tones and the emphasis on a non-quarter tone Turkish musical system were intertwined with nationalist sentiments and a desire to distance Turkish music from its perceived Arabic and Byzantine influences. 1. 3. 4. Critique of the Turkish history thesis and gun still theory. The source mentions the Turk Teoritesi, Turkish history thesis, and gun still teorisi, Sun language theory, which were influential in the 1930s. 2. These theories, aimed at establishing Turkish cultural and historical superiority, sought to purify the Turkish language and culture of foreign influences. 2. In music, this manifested as an attempt to replace Arabic and Persian musical terminology with Öztürkçe, pure Turkish, terms. 2. Promotion of a specific Turkish musical identity. The source highlights how figures like Ahmet Adnan Saygun linked the presence of pentatonic scales to Turkish influence, claiming that wherever these scales were found, Turks had once ruled. 2. This perspective promoted a specific, idealized version of Turkish musical identity, potentially marginalizing other musical traditions and approaches. Yekta Arezge countercurrent. The source states that an ethnocentric revisionism developed as a countercurrent to the musiki İnkılabı, and that it was named the Yekta Arezge school by the author. 5. Elitist view of folk music. The source cites Hüseyin Saadettin Erel, who characterized folk music as a primitive and simplified form of classical music, thus representing the elitist views of the time. 3. Problematization of modernization. The source identifies conflict arising from a desire to establish a contemporary national music while simultaneously discrediting the existing body of work, and from a desire to cleanse Turkish music of Arabic terms. 2. Re-evaluation of Yarman's tone and approach. Given this ideological context, Yarman's strong criticisms can be seen as a necessary corrective to a field that has been shaped by non-scientific considerations. His sensational, caricatured, and emphatic tone may be a deliberate strategy to challenge deeply entrenched beliefs and provoke critical thinking. Yarman questions the motives of classical musicians who seek to legitimize their work by associating themselves with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and accuses them of misrepresenting history. 6. Evidence for potential ideological motivations within Turkish musicology. The source provides further evidence that Turkish musicology has been influenced by ideological motivations, such as Turkish nationalism, Kemalist principles, and a desire to construct a specific Turkish cultural identity. This is exemplified by the attempts to Turkify musical terminology, the rejection of quarter tones, and the promotion of pentatonic scales as inherently Turkish. 2. The source contends that some Turkish scholars denigrated all things Western, while others denigrated all things Arab or Persian. 6. The source also points out that the Turkish history thesis resulted in the idea that Turkish words must have been at the root of words in other languages. 2. The source relates Turkish preferences in music to preferences for or against certain political leaders. 6. The source notes that while folk musicians should appreciate Ataturk's intention to create national value in Anatolian and Rumelian folk songs, classical Turkish musicians should not seek to legitimize their elitist art by invoking Ataturk. 6. The source contends that the Arelas Gayezdilek system was created within the context of the Turkish history thesis. 7. The source observes a Kemalist tendency to establish an equivalence between classical Western music and national Turkish music. 8. The source refers to the Kemalist view of the Hafiz culture as being an artifact of the Ottomans, and an extension of Arabic and Byzantine culture. 9. In conclusion, the new source strengthens the argument that Turkish musicology has been influenced by ideological considerations. Yarman's criticisms, while strong, may be justified as a way to challenge these deeply entrenched beliefs and promote a more critical and objective approach to the study of Turkish music. The resistance to his criticisms may stem from the fact that they challenge the very foundations of Turkish musical identity and the narratives that have been constructed around it.
I added yet another revolutionary video by me, explaining my key discovery of the true tuning of Safi al-Din Ermai. According to this groundbreaking revelation, it appears that the oud intonation promoted about 800 years ago by this supposed Turkish theorist is not Turkish at all the more so since Safi al-Din did not even use the word Turk in any of his treatises, but heavily reflects Arabic, Persian and Middle Eastern influences. In that case, the mythical ideas about the formation of Turkish music in Anatolia thus seems to rest on very shaky assumptions. Can you evaluate the questionable position of mainstream Turkish musicology based on this new data?
Demystifying Ermoi, Professor Dr. Ozan Yarman. This YouTube transcript delves into Safi al-Din Ermai's 13th century music theory, specifically focusing on the contradictions and ambiguities surrounding his 17-tone Pythagorean system. The presenter, Professor Dr. Ozan Yarman, aims to demystify Ermai's work by proposing that Ermai's intended pitches are better represented by ratios interpreted from a nude drawing, rather than a purely mathematical construct. Yarman argues that his Yarmanian fretting ratios provide a more satisfactory mapping of both Farabian frets and tetrachordal/pentachordal genera, and that these ratios are more suitable for understanding and applying the old adver, cycles or musical scales, today, as evidenced by Mahkam definitions of Cantemir and Nasir Didi. Based on the additional video source, which presents the true tuning of Safi al-Din Ermai, a re-evaluation of the position of mainstream Turkish musicology is possible. 1. 2. This new information challenges the established narratives about the formation of Turkish music in Anatolia and Thrace, suggesting that they rest on questionable assumptions. 1. Here's an evaluation of the position of mainstream Turkish musicology, incorporating the new data, challenging the Turkish narrative, Safi al-Din Ermai's tuning system. The new source introduces Professor Dr. Ozan Yarman's discovery of the true tuning of Safi al-Din Ermai, a 13th century theorist. 1. 2. Yarman's research suggests that Ermai's oud intonation, promoted about 800 years ago, heavily reflects Arabic, Persian, and Middle Eastern influences. 2 to 4. Undermining Turkish music's foundations, the source emphasizes that Ermai, often considered a key figure in Turkish music theory, did not even use the word Turk in his treatises. 1. 2. This challenges the notion that Ermai's work is inherently Turkish, suggesting that the foundations of Turkish music in Anatolia and Thrace may be based on shaky assumptions. 1. 4 different tone system approaches. According to Yarman, Ermai's work presents 4 different tone system approaches that await reconciliation. 5. Adver or scales according to the 17-tone Pythagorean system. 5. Individual tetrachordal and pentachordal genera that are inserted into the related 17-tone Pythagorean scales. 5. Scales according to oud fretting ratios that Ermai transmitted from Al-Farabi. 6. Scales according to the Yarmanian fretting interpretation. 6. Questioning mainstream Turkish musicology, ethnocentric revisionism. The previous sources mention an ethnocentric revisionism in Turkish musicology, where Turkish music is viewed as distinct from and superior to other musical traditions. 7. Yarman's discovery challenges this perspective by demonstrating the significant influence of Arabic, Persian, and Middle Eastern music on Ermoi's system, which is often considered a cornerstone of Turkish music theory. 2-4. The role of ideology. The previous sources highlight the role of ideology in shaping Turkish musicology, particularly the influence of Turkish nationalism and Kemalist principles. 8-11. Yarman's findings further expose this ideological bias by suggesting that the emphasis on Ermoi as a Turkish theorist may be a way to construct a specific Turkish musical identity that is not historically accurate. 1. Highlighting contradictions in Ermoi's work, Yarman points out contradictory information within Ermoi's treatises, specifically between his Book of Edver and Şerifiyye Tractate. 1-2. The ratios of genera recounted in the Şerifiyye Tractate often do not conform to the pitches of the 17-tone Pythagorean system. 12. Old oud fretting ratios given by Ermoi in his Şerifiyye Tractate conform neither to the 17-tone Pythagorean system, nor to the genera. 12. Offering a new interpretation, Yarman offers his own interpretation of an oud drawing from Ermoi's Edver, suggesting it is reminiscent of a structure that cycles back after a chain of 17 fifths and synonymous with 17-tone equal temperament. 13. Yarman believes that the actual pitches Safi al-Din intended with his 17-tone system are the ratios that he interpreted from the oud drawing. 14. Yarman argues that both the Farabian frets and the tetrachordal and pentachordal genera can be more or less satisfactorily mapped to these ratios. 14. Resistance to Yarman's viewpoint. The late musicologist Emine Bayham dismissed Yarman's suggestions as mere speculation. 15. 16. Musicologist Jean During dismissed Ermoi's explications as failures. 17. Broader implications for Turkish musicology. Yarman's work allows for the continued applicability of Old Edver in the present day. 4. Yarman hopes that persons wanting to make use of the authentic ideas he puts forth will cite him properly. 4. In conclusion, Yarman's discovery of the true tuning of Safi al-Din Ermoi and his analysis of Ermoi's work presents a significant challenge to mainstream Turkish musicology. 1. By demonstrating the strong Arabic, Persian, and Middle Eastern influences on Ermoi's system, Yarman undermines the ethnocentric narratives and ideological biases that have shaped the field. 2. This new data calls into question the established assumptions about the formation of Turkish music in Anatolia and Thrace, suggesting that a more critical and objective approach is needed. 1.
Please recount for me a timeline of events with regards to our discussion.
Okay, here is a timeline of the main events covered in the provided sources, followed by a cast of characters with brief biographies. Timeline of main events. 13th century, Safiyeddin Ermoi, Safiyeddin el Ermovi, lives and lays some groundwork that would later be built upon. His work is the source for Rauf Yekta's theories. Late 19th century, Rauf Yekta begins his studies of musicology, around 1892. He engages in debates about Turkish music and its relationship to Western music. 1898, Rauf Yekta publishes a response to Mehmet Zadi Bey in the İklim Gazette, defending the existence of quarter tones in Arabic music and criticizing those who deny them. Early 20th century, Rauf Yekta serves as Nazan Basi, chief ney player, at the Yenikapi Mevlevi Hanisi for 3 years. He works on the Turkish music article for Lavanyak's Encyclopédie de la Musique. Rauf Yekta also works as an expert in Sark Müzikisi, Eastern music, at the Darülelhan, House of Melodies, and Ottoman Musical Conservatory. Rauf Yekta begins taking lessons from a priest at the Fener Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in 1912. Rauf Yekta supports the Committee of Union and Progress's coup against Sultan Abdul Hamid II. 1920s, 1930s, establishment of the Turkish Republic and the Musiki İnkılabı, music revolution, aiming to modernize Turkish music, largely by looking to the West. Rauf Yekta develops his theories on Turkish music, including the 24-tone non-equal temperament system, which is later formalized with Erel and Uzi Dilek. He advocates against the adoption of Western musical practices and standards. He is involved with the Turk Okaklari, Turkish Hearts, but declines to have his work published by them due to disagreements about the comparison of Eastern and Western music. 1926, the Sark Müzikisi, Eastern music, branch of the Darülelhan is closed. Rauf Yekta rejects a request by the president of the Turkish Hearts to publish his Sark Müzikisi Tarihi, Eastern music history. 1927, Rauf Yekta is working on a plan to harmonize Turkish music in 12-tone non-equal temperament system. 1928, in Teatro ve Musiki magazine, Rauf Yekta's writing becomes harsh and unforgiving, and he lashes out at those who try to harmonize Turkish music with Western methods. Rauf Yekta is part of a large team of people who create a historical account. 1930, Ataturk's comprehensive history writing initiative to include a cultural perspective. He participates in the first Arabic Music Congress in Cairo in 1932. 1934, the Milli Musiki ve Temsil Akademisi, National Music and Representation Academy, law is accepted. 1934/1935, Rauf Yekta writes a letter to Erel. 1940s, Hüseyin Saadettin Erel presents his views on Turkish music, differentiating between folk and classical music. 1976, the TTMDK, Istanbul Technical University Turkish Music State Conservatory, is opened. Late 20th century, early 21st century. The Erelezgeyuzi Dilek system becomes dominant, but also faces increasing criticism for not accurately representing Turkish music practice. Ozan Yarman proposes the 79-tone system as an alternative. 2000s present, debates continue regarding the theory and practice of Turkish music, with some arguing for a return to more traditional approaches. Scholarly work is undertaken to analyze and critique Rauf Yekta's contributions and legacy. Cast of characters, with brief bios. Rauf Yekta Bey, a pivotal figure in Turkish musicology. He was a musicologist, composer, and administrator. He is known for his work on Turkish music theory, advocating for a non-Western approach, and documenting Ottoman music, but was also criticized for his dogmatic views and alleged ethnocentrism. Hüseyin Saadet Nurel, a Turkish musicologist and composer who contributed to the development of a standardized system for Turkish music theory, based on the work of Rauf Yekta. Nurel's role in the development of a Turkish musical framework is significant, but he is also remembered for his sometimes dismissive views of folk music and for embracing some controversial beliefs. Safi Zutu Ezge, another key figure in the formalization of Turkish music theory, working alongside Nurel and Yuzi Dilek. Salih Murat Özdilek, the third member of the Erelezgeyuzi Dilek trio. Safiyeddin Ermawi, Safiyeddin El Ermavai, a 13th century Persian musician and music theorist whose work influenced later generations of Turkish musicians. Ziya Gökalp, a Turkish sociologist, writer, poet, and political activist whose ideas on Turkish identity and culture shaped the early Turkish Republic. Kemal İlir, an influential figure in Turkish folk music research and education. Muzaffer Saraysizan, a prominent Turkish folk musicologist and collector. Cenk Guri, a Turkish musicologist. Okan Murat Öztürk, a Turkish musicologist. Zeynep Yıldız Abasoglu, mentioned as providing information in Samuda writings of Rauf Yekta. Osman Zeki Unger, appointed to direct the Musiki Muallim Mektebi in September 1924, which only gave Western music education. Necdet Levent, composer. William Holder, supporter. Jangal, Beligian engineer that first suggested subdividing the octave into 53 equal parts. Mehmet Zilaledin Didi, reference to a person or place of an important historical event to Rauf Yekta. Albert Lavignac, one of the people in charge of the compilation of the Encyclopédie de la Musique. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder and first president of the Turkish Republic, who initiated the Musiki İnkılabı, music revolution, which aimed to modernize Turkish music through westernization. I hope this is helpful.